affected country via a boat, via a lorry, or any other unsafe route because they need to be in a safer environment, there's no exemption. The Home Office can decide to deport them back to their home country, and then this leads to a high risk of being human trafficked. Now, again, I can't imagine the trauma that goes through that. I can't imagine the frightening atmosphere that goes through a mother's head with the possibility of being deported back, with the possibility of maybe being harmed, having her children harmed. I can't imagine, can only imagine. So yeah, that's just something to really think about when we discuss the migration bill, or when people are trying to discuss the migration bill, and the harm and effects that we as people in the UK may do towards people who are seeking asylum, who are refugees. You know, many of them are fleeing for a good reason. We really need to show our compassion with them. So I'll be speaking more of the migration bill later on in this episode, but for now, the current Sudan conflict has been an ongoing conflict since the 2019 uprising. If you're unaware, Omar al-Bashir had been the president of Sudan for 30 years, from 1989 to 2019. He was the country's longest term president until he was ousted in a coup d'etat. During this time, the food costs had risen in Sudan, which then caused mass protests across the country. So I guess I'll break it down. After al-Bashir, since then, the Sudanese armed forces and the rapid support forces have since rose to a point of conflict, which broke out last month. So April 2023, this conflict broke out. And the reason for the conflict is due to the efforts that were made after al-Bashir's outings to move towards a democratic and civilian-led government. And I really want to also acknowledge that our friend organisation, SPAC & Co, actually did a really insightful post about the timeline from 2019 to present year of the uprising and the conflict over on their social media. So please give them a follow on Instagram. That is SPAC & Co. I really just wanted to mention them as I speak about this, because I guess when educating myself about the conflict, I came across their post about it. And yeah, I really wanted to mention that, and also speak about the actual devastation this current conflict is doing to innocent people of the country that many of us are not aware of. You know, over 185 people have sadly passed in Sudan since April, and over 1,500 have been injured. Again, not many people know this in the global majority. And I think I want to repeat that 185 people have passed away since April last month, and 1,500 people have been injured in a space of 3 weeks due to this conflict. It's huge and it's ongoing. And I can't help but think about those who are trying to flee the country for safety, and some unfortunately are unable to do so. And with that being said, many have fled to other countries which neighbour Sudan, such as Egypt. But the problem is, fleeing to Egypt as a refugee, the Sudanese people are actually under tourist visas. And this raises an issue because the people of Sudan aren't actually coming into Egypt as tourists. They've been displaced from their country and have become refugees. And to also let people know, having the tourist visa will mean that people seeking refuge in Egypt will not have access to Egyptian aid networks or international support options for refugees. So they won't have any support while being in that country. They won't have any aid. And there will be a struggle as so many Sudanese people are fleeing to Egypt and may be unaware that there won't be any aid networks. And according to DW News, there is a really slow process with the visa applications of regular Sudanese people due to suspension and backlog of paperwork that resulted from the evacuation of diplomatic staff and internationals at the beginning of the clashes. So for context, the UK announced the last of their evacuation flights. So around 2,341 British nationals have been airlifted from Sudan. And I really want to pause for a second and really think about that and how the Sudanese people aren't getting the help and aid they need compared to the 2,341 British nationals who lived in Sudan. And I guess it leaves me with wondering questions. Will the struggle of power later intensify once majority foreign citizens have left? Will the Sudanese people have aid in the networks and more people from the global majority be aware of what's happening? Will funds be raised for them? And I really want to revert this back to the UK's illegal migration bill and the Home Office's backlog, the UK's Home Office backlog of more than 160,000 cases. 160,000 cases of people who are seeking refuge, who are asylum seekers, who are migrants in the UK, haven't got their status yet due to the backlog. Yet the legal migration bill is supposedly coming in full force, and it's going to target all 160,000 people, even if they've been claiming status for years in the UK, still going to affect them. So the conflict that is happening in Sudan is no different to what is happening here. And the frameworks we use at AGN are consistently speaking about this in the context of our work, Act Local, Think Global. It's a really great one. It's part of our 13th recommendation. And when I'm discussing the two situations here, we really continue to do this work and connect with individuals, communities, and organizations locally and globally who have this consciousness embedded and who demonstrate a desire to build in solidarity and work together for true planet repairs and discuss the land and lives of those who are being disproportionately threatened by the destructive neo-colonial practices. Again, it's so important to act local and think global. Just that it's happening miles and miles away doesn't mean that there isn't similarities in what's happening here. And I keep going back to the compassionate learning, I guess, and being compassionate and aware of others whenever I'm, I guess, explaining what's happening. So yeah, that's just one thing out of many of our 13 recommendations that I wanted to include. And I guess with the neo-colonial practices, that is in regards to a lot of things, including extractive industry and multinational corporations. I say this because of the concerns that Sudan's neighbouring countries are expressing about the shared Nile waters and oil pipelines to the shape of a new government and a new humanitarian crisis in the making. You know, this needs a lot of us who are passionate about the climate, who are passionate about climate justice, to really, really listen to this conflict, to really, really understand this conflict and what is going on in Sudan, because it's way bigger than two rival sides in conflict. It's way bigger than that. It's going to affect everyone, including the climate. You know, there's hostile environments everywhere. But once a hostile environment becomes so hostile to which the people can no longer live there anymore, we need to think, who is going to look after our siblings across the globe? Who is going to amplify the voices of our siblings in the global south? It's up to us to really, really come together and read about what is happening and ask the question, what can we do in terms of supporting? And I guess over on our RGN socials in the next coming weeks, we'll be speaking a lot about the Sudanese conflicts. Our social media is the Racial Justice Network on all platforms, including Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. And in the meantime, I really strongly urge you also, please, if possible, read about this conflict, the similarities of those who have fled their war-inflicted homes in Europe are no different to the people of Sudan, no different. And again, another question, I like questions, I like rhetorical questions. What difference does it make somebody who has left their war-inflicted home in Europe compared to somebody who has left their war-inflicted home in Africa, in Asia? What difference does it make? So a good way to start supporting people other than, you know, our local people internationally is by really educating and unlearning any biases that you may have of refugees who live within the global south, and understanding international perspectives on climate justice and the many solutions are already being modelled by frontline activists and communities in the majority world. 3 individuals who I will really like to mention are Nisreen Islam, El-Bashir Idris, and Bison Blast. They're all 3 of them are on Twitter, and I'll repeat the names again for anybody that will like to follow, like to read their tweets, like to educate. Nisreen Islam, El-Bashir Idris, and Bison Blast. And they're all on Twitter, and I believe you can also, you know, give them a Google search, and they have tons of climate activist work. And they're really, really strong advocates. And their work really amplifies the unheard voices and stories of the people of Sudan. So before I round up this episode, I would also really, really like to shed light on the current news that is going on in the Comoran island of Anjouan. If you're not aware of what is going on, I'm here to explain a little bit of what's going on. So Anjouan is situated in the Comoro Islands, which is an archipelago. I don't know if I'm saying that right. I'm not the best at pronouncing things, but of volcanic islands. It's been a long day, guys. Situated off the southeastern coast of Africa and in the southeastern Indian Ocean. I believe it's quite close to the country Mozambique. So since last month, there has been ongoing protests on the streets of the capital, Musammadu, against France's controversial operation, Wambushu. And this operation is aimed at kicking out undocumented migrants. Many of them are Comorans. Many of them are people of the Comoran island. And they're aiming to kicking them out the French island of Mayotte, which is really, really close to the Comorans. Once again, history is repeating itself with colonial powers in full force. So I'd really, really like to show our international solidarity to those who are protesting against the authorities. I can only imagine how unsettling it must be to have an environment that you call home destroyed by authorities, overseas authorities. Now, you've heard my voice for the past, I'm not sure how long, but I really, really wanted this episode to be an important time where we're all reflecting this weekend. And after the weekend, just really, really understanding what is going on, both internationally and locally. It's really, really important to have this compassionate learning, to have compassion for your neighbor, for your friends, for your loved ones. You might not know what they're going through. You might not know what their families are going through. So it's super important that we really come at a time, these unprecedented times, to understand one another. And despite the celebration, I really, really hope a lot of you celebrate this weekend. But despite the celebrations, again, there is a really, really big time now more than ever to really come together as communities, as people who are wanting social, racial, economic justice, to really understand and amplify the voices of everyone. So, to close off this episode, I'd like to thank you all for listening. I would also like to thank the BCB Radio for having us on the Castle Show. Our next episode, I believe, will be on, let me think, pretty sure it will be on the 9th of June. We actually have 2 episodes in the month of June, and that is because we are off in August. So we as the Argentine shut down for August, and we really work on repairing ourselves individually, really just looking after our well-being. So yeah, I have the dates up. So the next episode of the Catalyst Show would be Friday the 2nd of June, and part 2 will be Friday the 30th of June. So please stay tuned. And in the meantime, look after yourselves, look after one another, and really amplify everyone's voices. I've been Sarai, and also catch us on social media at the Racial Justice Network. You can read the full migration bill article by Karis on our website, the Racial Justice Network, and you can also read the full reports either on our website or the Stop the Scan campaign.uk. I hope you all have a really lovely rest of the evening, and we will see you on